Hello everybody. We are going to discuss new public management perspective in public administration today. I'm Alka Dhameja from the Faculty of Public Administration, and I have with me two experts, one from the Faculty of Public Administration, Dr. Uma Medhuri, and Dr. Rajveer Sharma from the AIST College Political Science Faculty. He's reader in Political Science Faculty. So we're going to talk about new public management perspective. That is the new so-called new paradigm in public administration. We're going to discuss how new is this new paradigm. How is it different from the previous approaches that we've had in public administration? Then is this paradigm going to stay, or are we moving towards other paradigms? But before we start the discussion today, let's first talk a little about new public management perspective, which actually emphasizes on market-oriented public administration, customer-focused public administration, mission-specific public administration, goal-oriented public administration, incentive-oriented public administration, risk-taking, entrepreneurial public administration. In the course of the discussion, we will see how these objectives of NPM are really new to public administration, or are they just built upon the other previous approaches in public administration. In India, the NPM perspective got a boost with the 5th Finance Commission and 5th Pay Commission and the first 1991 Industrial Policy Resolution. And further, in our Chief Secretary's Conference in 1996, the NPM perspective, the things which NPM stands for, got further teeth. Now, what are the factors that actually led to the NPM paradigm in the developing countries, not necessarily India or in the entire developing world? Public sector reforms have been an integral part of public administration all throughout the world. In India specifically, we've had lots of committees which have got into this issue of public sector reforms, like the Paul Appleby Committee, we all know, A.D. Gorwala Committee and Gopal Swami Iyengar Committee, and lots of committees which have till date talked about how we can reform the public sector. So public sector was a sector which was given a lot of priority in India after independence. The major thrust was on the public sector. Only very peripheral areas were in the domain of the private sector. Despite all the efforts of public sector reforms, slowly the public sector started feeling the pressure of its own burden. Things like red tape, delays, expenditure, wastage, hierarchy, all these factors started plaguing public sector, and public sector was continuously looking for solutions. And all these solutions, it also tried organizational changes like desk officer system, O&M system, and quality circles, team improvement plans, lot of training methods, just to restructure itself and reform itself. But still, in this globalization scenario, when public sector was itself looking for a new paradigm, NPM just came its way, and it seems the developing world, specifically India, we are talking about today, just lapped it up. Plus, I feel there were external pressures like the Washington Consensus under the International Monetary Fund and World Bank talked about aid conditionalities and told the developing world to actually structurally adjust its programs and roll back the state in core areas and major areas to make way for new type of paradigm, new type of reform. So it was more of a global compulsion than a national necessity that we actually went for the NPM paradigm. The third thing I feel is, interestingly, the disciplinary advances which led to the new public management paradigm that we have today. Right from the very beginning, we've had approaches like the Taylor scientific management, Taylorism, then human relations approach, behavioral approach, systems approach, public choice theory. What is very strange about these epistemological viewpoints is that they have always been guided by the scenario in which they have been a part of. The context has always overshadowed the content of these theoretical paradigms. For instance, when we were into industrialization in a big way, laissez-faire was the key word, and all the theories like the scientific management and Urwick and Gulick's principles of management, Taylorism, it all talked about reforming organizations so that productivity was a key word, the outcomes were stressed, the emphasis was on effectiveness and efficiency. And then there was a brief period when human relations approach and systems approach and behavioral approaches posed a counter viewpoint to the scientific management approach. But slowly and steadily, as we moved towards the welfare state, the statist approaches came into view. Weber's bureaucracy became a predominant paradigm and stayed on for till the time that we moved towards a new liberal perspective. So interestingly, when we were talking about industrial revolution and when we were talking about laissez-faire, the theories in public administration also sang the same tune. And when we talked about the statist approach, the welfare approach, all the paradigms were bureaucracy laden paradigms. And then when we switched over to the new liberal perspective, the paradigms which were predominant in public administration were transaction cost analysis, more of economic oriented approaches and principal agent theory, public choice theory, and now NPM actually builds on these new liberal perspective approaches, viewpoints, paradigms, whatever we want to call it. So the disciplinary changes in public administration also gradually moved towards the new public management perspective. So this is a perspective that we are going to talk about today. This is a perspective which got predominance in late 1980s and is here to stay with us. We have to see how well we can adapt to this perspective. What kind of developing world perspective can we develop to face the challenge of NPM? What is new about NPM? What is not new about NPM? How it has evolved in India and other countries? So let me set the ball rolling and ask Dr. Rajvi Sharma that what exactly, sir, do you feel is NPM? And is NPM really different from the previous approaches and viewpoints or theories that we've had in public administration?
Well, thank you, Alka. I think you have made my job a little easy by giving a proper perspective of the evolution of the discipline of public administration. And in fact, when we talk of new public management, our emphasis cannot ignore the debate about the role of the state and public administration in bringing about transformation in the socio-economic conditions of the people in general. And therefore, when we discuss things with Weber, I think it would be easier for us to differentiate between the traditional model of public administration and the new paradigm which is termed as new public management. In fact, a state came into a position to play a dominant role, particularly with the adoption of welfarist scheme. And it was decided that even though it can be a mixed economy, but the state shall play the role of commanding heights. And naturally it led to a very dominant, decisive role by the public institutions, including public sector, what we call even public bureaucracies. And as you have rightly suggested, you have rightly said that our experience with the performance of public sector has not been very encouraging at times. Bureaupathologies developed, bureaucratic dysfunctionalism developed, as you said, delays, wastage, negative attitude of workers, corruption, degeneration of the bureaucratic and political norms, lack of competition, secretive behavior, a behavior which was based on self-righteous approach. Perhaps the administration came to occupy not only the central role but also a decisive say in not only policy making but also delivery of the goods and services. It is also a fact, Alka, that this role and this scenario led to dissatisfaction amongst the citizenry. Sometimes people say that it may be termed as failure of the welfare state, and it is also a fact that over a period of time there has emerged a new set of aspirations of the people and the growing pressure of the people for inclusivity. They don't want anymore to remain at the periphery. Exclusivity should be replaced by inclusivity is a new norm. So demands, democratic pressures, economic failures, failure of the delivery system, lack of effectivity, efficiency, they all taken together gave rise to a new concept which is now being termed as new public management. I would say that it is a reform model. It's not something new, but you can say that it is, to my mind, it is just a reformist model over the past approaches and concepts. And if you permit me, I can say that it is rather a step forward from the concept of development administration. It is an expansion of some of the ideas of development administration, as you rightly said, that it is mission oriented, that it is goal oriented, that it is citizen oriented, that it is participation oriented, that it is responsive system. So new public management in fact focuses on removing some of the deficiencies of the old traditional model of public administration. You talked of Weber, and he thought that it is the most rational model because it is based on procedures, rules, regulations, because it is based on impersonality, because it is based on merit, and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that this model did not find a true acceptance and has been subjected to various criticisms, particularly in the context of the developing world, which was struggling for a change in the life conditions of its mass majority of the people who were poor, ignorant, who were suffering from the lack of even the provision of basic needs. It is in this context, besides what you have said, the other pressures, international as well as internal, which led to the emergence of the concept of new public management. New public management is concerned with cost reduction, or which is now recently being called as right sizing of the government, where there has to be a balancing between your expenditure and your performance. New public management basically lays focus on results. It lays focus on flexibility rather than rigidities. Rules, regulations and procedures, though, are important, but new public management is not merely concerned with these systems alone. They must serve the people. Rules, regulations, procedures are meant for the people rather than the other way around. That is what the focus is. At the same time, it also realizes that, as you said, that public sector became almost non-performing, monopolistic kind of tendencies, or you can say public sector became a pampered child. Therefore, you can also say that public sector led to rather its own world empire building, ignoring the people for whom it was meant. So, new public management emphasizes that a state is not to play the role of a doer. It is not concerned with administration, it is concerned with governance. What does it mean? It means that the state must play the role of a facilitator. It should create the conducive, friendly environment in which others can deliver the services. Delivery of services has to be separated from policy. It is not to act as a machine to implement. Implementation aspect has to be given to others, the private sector. As you said, marketization, market came to the central place in this new management philosophy. There has to be a partnership, there has to be a cooperation between the state and the private sector. Level playing field has to be created by the state. Does not mean that everything has to be privatized. New public management does not envisage a total privatization of the goods and services, but it says that there has to be a redefinition of the role of the state. It talks of a vigorous state, it talks of a very effective state, it does not talk of a big state. That is the difference. The traditional model laid emphasis on the big government, though inefficient. New public management says no, we don't require a big government, we require efficient government, we require responsive government, we require effective government. And for that it states that the delivery of services can be outsourced, can be contracted out. So government by contract, administration by outsourcing is one of the philosophies of new public management. Competition, as I said in the beginning, is another important factor, important element of new public management. Competition can be within the public agencies, competition can be between public agencies and the private agencies, competition can be between private and other private agencies within the private sector. But it does insist on introducing competitiveness. It will lead to two things. One, it is likely to give choice, which we call exit theory, and the voice to the consumers, to the citizen. And it is also likely to improve the quality of the goods and services. Competition is supposed to introduce quality change, better choices, large range of choices, where if the quality of the service being provided by one agency is not good in the eyes of the consumer, he can change over to the other agency, and therefore he can get the best value for his money. That is what the underlying principle of new public management is. Competition will improve speed, competition will reduce cost, competition will improve quality, and competition will give larger choices to the common man, to the consumers. At the same time, it also insists on responsiveness and accountability. In fact, this is one of the major criticisms against the public bureaucracy, that it has over a period of time developed an approach of unresponsiveness and unaccountability. What is a responsive institution and what is not a responsive institution? A responsive institution or responsive individual is one who really designs his actions in response to the assessed needs of his target groups, the clientele, the people. It is a behavior which is in line with the felt needs of the people. And responsive behavior also is one which is time bound, because if you are responding very late, then the very meaning of responsiveness is lost. Another difference between new public management and the traditional model is based on the principle of decentralization and centralization of governance. In fact, the old model also has been discussing these aspects. It is not that we are discussing something very new. The questions of centralization and decentralization have been associated with the debate on the scope and the nature of public administration, the principles of public administration. Debate also has been discussing all these aspects. But new public management theory emphasizes it very clearly in no uncertain terms that decentralized governance is the panacea and the deprivations of the common public can be taken care of, the basic minimum needs can be provided to the people if the power is given to them. From centralized polity to decentralized governance is the basic principle of new public management. In other words, I am saying that new public management, in contrast to the old one, underscores the principle of empowerment of people. Now, what is this empowerment? Because we must be very clear about empowerment of people. It means giving the rights to the people in a very simple way to decide for themselves. It is the enabling system. You enable the people to participate in decision making, in decision implementation, in planning, and finding out the various development alternatives in accordance with what they think to be right. In a way, I am trying to suggest that it is the dispersal of power from the center to the periphery, from central government to local government journey is the basic objective of new public management. Now, this is so far as the basic difference between the old traditional model of public administration and new public management model of public administration is concerned, to my mind. Now, I would like to place and to know from Uma as to what are the practices of new public management, what are the experiments being made in implementing this new theory in some other countries of the globe.
As Dr. Rajveer Sharma had rightly pointed out, new public management, which is a reform model, it actually tried to give a push, or it tried to shake the entire governmental machinery all over the world. And the pioneering efforts in this direction have been made to begin with by Britain and USA. Britain had initiated several steps in this direction under the regime of Margaret Thatcher. To begin with, because the problems that plagued the British economy at that time was the same, the oil crisis and the increasing fiscal deficit and the citizens' dissatisfaction with the entire governmental performance gave rise to a serious thinking about how the governments can be reformed. So, to begin with, Thatcher had invited the managing director of Marks and Spencer, Rayner, to look into the entire governmental machinery and suggest some measures which were considered by many as drastic. So, this was in a sense a beginning of the private sector initiative into the governmental, like inviting a person from the private sector to look into the governmental operations. So, as Dr. Sharma was saying, that best value for money was the guiding principle, and the team then under the chairmanship of Derek Rayner had suggested various scrutinies. To begin with, it scrutinized into the functioning of the departments, and the questions that were posed were like, is the department or the ministry which is functioning, is it worth enough? What is the value of that ministry or department, and what is its contribution to the governmental system? So, the entire thing was looked at from a cost control perspective, whether some activities can be done away with. And to give a wider perspective to this, later an office for public service was created in the British administrative system, which looked into the functioning of the various ministries and departments, and it recommended that certain ministries or the departments have become redundant and they might be wound up. And this led to a creation of next steps agencies. As Dr. Sharma was pointing out, even new public management in a way tried to give emphasis to the dichotomy of policy and administration, which Woodrow Wilson had enunciated long back. New public management is more managerial in nature. It gives emphasis to the implementation aspect. So, it tried to create in Britain the next steps agencies which were entrusted with certain implementing aspects, the policies of which were laid down by the concerned sponsoring department. So, from each ministry or department, some activities were taken away, and for that, for implementing that, separate agencies were created in the form of next steps agencies, and they had civil servants as well as chief executives who were appointed on the basis of a contract from outside. So this was another major development. And the other thing which John Major had done was, as it was said, that the public sector or the government has to be responsive to the needs of the people. So how is it, how to know whether the citizens are satisfied with the services, and what is the mechanism for redressal of grievances of the citizens against any public service provider? To give effect to this, citizens' charters were initiated in the year 1991, where each public service provider was asked to give or state in clear terms the services the concerned agency was providing, like what are the measures for assessing the effectiveness of the services and the redressal mechanisms that exist with the citizens in case they are not satisfied. So this actually gave rise to several initiatives, and several improvements were brought about in this, and even India later tried to adopt the Citizens' Charter. Then slowly in Britain, the new public management slowly gave way to partnership between the public as well as the private, and slowly even the civil society organizations were also brought in its fold. And another major initiative in Britain has been privatization. The privatization thing, which is being spoken of in developing countries, especially India, it has begun with Britain, where the government decided to sell off the assets of, to begin with, in British oil and gas to reduce the fiscal deficit. So Britain had initiated all these measures, and next comes USA, where in 1992 the major initiative had come up with the work of Osborne and Gabler on reinventing government. The basic thing there was the federal services surveys about the services provided indicated that there has been a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the citizens about the services being provided by the US government. So a need was felt that something has to be done to reform the government. So at the same time, a work published by Osborne and Gabler about reinventing government gave some serious thinking into it, where they pleaded or they made a case for making the governments more entrepreneurial, risk-taking, innovative, and also they prescribed certain principles where the government has to now more steer, like as Dr. Rajveer Sharma was saying, instead of doing, it has to facilitate others to do, encourage competition, be more proactive rather than reactive, participative, community oriented. So all these principles found in the form of this entrepreneurial concept, where the governments, it was felt, has to be more risk taking and dynamic. They should be more result oriented. And even keeping this in view, in 1993, Al Gore had initiated the National Performance Review, wherein it was a very big exercise where all the federal agencies were subject to in-depth scrutinies, and the basic emphasis of this National Performance Review was to identify redundant activities, empower the customers, empower the employees, give employees more autonomy, and then enable them deliver the results, and also do away with certain activities which are consuming lot of money and are not yielding results. And even there is a continuity in this, and later certain reinvention laboratories have been set up. In a way, these concepts have been applied to specific departments, and monitoring has been done to find out the results these efforts have brought about. And later this entire reinventing government thing is still being continued, and with Bush taking up, like, the emphasis is more on strategic human capital, where it is felt that the people who are in various positions in the federal service have to be empowered, and there is need to strengthen their capacities, and the focus now is more on electronic government also. So Britain and USA have been the forerunners in the entire thing, but there were other countries, like for example New Zealand also, which had so many enterprises being run under departmental form, had initiated measures through various acts where the enterprises have been corporatized, they have been deregulated, privatized, and emphasis in all these countries now is more on outcomes. Since so much of money is going into the governmental activities, it should not just be measured in form of the money that is yielding, also with the outcomes. In New Zealand, the emphasis is more on outcomes. Even Australia, for example, has introduced several initiatives like user charges, like the services which have been provided by the government as a welfare state now have been categorized into various groups, where people who can afford now have to pay for certain services. So all these initiatives, when you look at the international perspective, it brings out that the message is very clear, like the governments now cannot be taken for granted, they have to be performance oriented, the accent is on results, and they have to be held accountable if they are not functioning properly. But now the question arises, we are speaking of public administration where the emphasis or the key word is public, but is it a proper thing like to bring suddenly the private sector initiatives and concepts in this? Like, is it a right thing to do? Then where will the publicness aspect in public administration go?
I totally agree with Dr. Meduri that she gave examples from all the countries that are rich, that have people who are literate, aware, that have infrastructure which is pretty well developed. So in these countries, when we talk about a management paradigm, I don't know how effective the experiments have been. The outcome is yet to be totally analyzed and determined. But in these countries, these kind of experiments still do not sound out of place because it has the necessary paraphernalia to go about with this kind of an approach. But when we talk about the developing countries, we have to see that whether this kind of an approach would actually yield results or not, because ours is a country which is poor, which is almost semi-literate, which does not have the kind of infrastructure that is required for this kind of full-fledged privatization. Dr. Rajveer Sharma also very lucidly described about what is NPM, how responsive it is, how competitive it is, how accountable it is, how it leads to well-laid decentralization and diffusion of agencies. But now we have to discuss whether this so-called beautifully designed paradigm of new public management is really applicable to the developing countries like India. If yes, then why, and if no, how can we improve upon it or maybe take steps to adapt towards it. Like Uma mentioned just now, all these countries like US, UK and New Zealand have experimented with NPM but have also not sidelined the issue of public service and the client, the interests of the client. So alongside the organizational changes the NPM is talking about, NPM is also talking about the interests of the consumers. It is also talking about being responsive to the public. It is also talking about service. Like Denhart and Denhart said that all we need is new public service instead of new public management, which is a nice synthesis of the good governance approach that we have adopted, plus the NPM approach. That is, alongside the organizational changes, we are also talking about the peripheral changes, that is the grassroots changes, the changes where actually the citizens meet the state and the market and form a space for themselves. These democratic spaces, I feel, are very important in a developing country's context, and this is where NPM, I feel, does not really go into the periphery of a system. It talks about the core, it talks about the organization, it talks about the structural changes, but I have my doubts whether NPM has some answer of how to reconcile the consumer interests with the citizens' rights, because they are two different things. Moreover, I feel when we talk about so much of diffusion in a country, so much of diffusion of organizational structures, then how do we actually connect it with the kind of a setup we already have in terms of accountability, the ministerial accountability, the parliamentary questions. We have a full legal system of public interest litigation, Lok Adalats, Jan Adalat, Jan Sunwai. How do we actually connect this well laid down system with the diffused agencies, bureaucratic agencies that NPM talks about? It is even criticized that NPM actually replaces one form of bureaucracy with the other form of bureaucracy, the new type of bureaucracy, because private sector is also not devoid of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is something which just creeps in every kind of organization, whether it is government organization or it is a non-government organization, say a private organization, any kind of non-state or non-market setup. So bureaupathologies is something we have to deal with. No paradigm is going to solve it unless we have certain checks and balances, certain mechanisms to deal with it. And another thing that I feel, that efficiency and economy and effectiveness, the 3 E's the NPM talk about, are the 3 E's which earlier paradigms have also talked about. The only difference is that it just lays more emphasis on it. Its vocabulary is very conspicuous, its vocabulary is very beautiful, and it just, you know, strikes a chord with whosoever is talking about NPM. But we have to see in a developing context, do we really need this kind of marketized public administration system? And moreover, the greatest paradox, I will just ask Dr. Uma Maiduri and Rajvi Sharma to talk about it, but I feel the greatest paradox of NPM is that it criticizes the government for not delivering the goods for so long. It criticizes the government for being so wasteful and so hierarchical and bureaucratic. And on the other hand, it expects the government now to perform this enabling role in a complex market situation. It now expects the government to deal to the demands of the citizens, the clients, under the new system of market, new system of outsourcing, contracts, and all kinds of bidding and all kinds of competitive benchmarking that it has. And how can the same government, which has not been able to produce results in developing countries, is expected to, you know, now perform an enabling and facilitating role in an entire new setup? It's the same government, it's the same mindset, it's the same infrastructure. Only the expectations and only the paradigm has changed. So I would just like to know from Dr. Rajvi Sharma, what is his view on NPM, and then maybe Dr. Uma Maiduri would tell us how she feels India can adapt to this new paradigm.
Dr. Alka, let me say that whatever critique you have presented is not unfounded. There are apprehensions in the mind of the people that new public management may give rise to some other kind of problems of disparities, inequalities, exploitations, and so on. But let me at the same time also state that new public management does not lose sight of publicness in administration. The public interest is not lost sight of. New public management only seeks to redefine the role of the state. It does not talk of withdrawal of the state. Let us be very clear about it. And therefore, the state shall yet be concerned with protection of the rights of the weak, protection of the rights of the poor. Like for example in India, though since the mid-80s we are now in one way or the other on the path to the adoption and implementation of the concept of new public management, but it also remains a fact that the state is still concerned with social sector development, the human development aspects. The entire thrust on rural development is still 200 schemes being run by the state for the welfare of the weak in the rural areas, and the rural development in general is indicative of the fact that the state is not withdrawing. The state is only seeking to redefine, to find out the areas where it must continue to play a role, particularly in the context of developing countries. I am not talking of the rich countries, but in a country like India, which is of course a part of the developing world, the state shall have to find out the ways and means where it should continue to serve the poor, the helpless, the disabled, and at the same time must admit and also do away with license Raj, permit Raj, quota Raj, which has rather impeded the progress than helped the change processes in the country. At the same time, new public management though talks of competitiveness, competitiveness does not necessarily, as I said earlier, also mean total privatization. Competitiveness may be within the public sector also.
So I think as Dr. Rajveer was saying, now we have, along with the state, like NPM in a way has brought in other players in the thing, like private sector and as well as the civil society, where I think NPM has slightly got broadened, and now we are talking of the good governance. So the entire debate on this new public management perspective, the role of state is changing, and only thing is now the state has to be looked at in establishing a synergy between the government and the private players as well as the government and the civil society organizations. But in the entire thing, we should not lose sight of the fact that whatever services are being provided by the private players or by the government or by civil society, the efficiency aspect should not be diluted. Ultimately, all these players have to give responsive services to the citizens. It is the goal of the entire thing, of this entire reform model, as we were saying, is to improve the services or emphasize on the public service delivery aspect. I would like to thank Dr. Rajveer Sharma and Dr. Alka Dhameja for participating in this discussion on the new public management perspective. Thank you.